Hello, welcome to another special Sonic Lab. Today we're very lucky, we've got the guys from Elektron who've come in. This is John and this is Jenk. Jenk's going to be doing the demonstrating, John's going to be doing the talking. We're having a look at the brand new Analog 4 from Elektron. So the Analog 4 is an analog synthesizer. I mean, how analog is it?
The oscillators are analog, the filters are analog, and there's an overdrive circuit between the filters of each track. It's also analog.
So this is new, because previous synthesizers, MonoMachine and Machine Drum have been kind of VA, haven't they? Virtual analog.
Yeah, they're all based on digital modeling. So this is a new step for us.
You've crammed it all into a tiny box.
This we have done.
So let's have a look at the front panel. It's actually quite a small unit, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very compact, and that's the intention. So you can use it live and bring it with you wherever you go, basically. And on the front panel you have here track pages.
So there's 4 tracks.
Yeah, 4 tracks of analog voices.
So that's one for each voice, right?
Yeah, one dedicated track for each voice. You have one FX track for the send effects, and you have a CV track when you're sending CV gate signals to external analog equipment. And then here, on the bottom of the unit, you have a 16-step step sequencer.
So this is familiar to people who perhaps use a Machine Drum or MonoMachine. It's the
yeah,
same sort of format.
It's the same concept, correct. And each pattern, as they're called in this unit, can consist of up to 64 steps. So you're not limited to only 16 steps.
And you've got the same group switches there that you have on some of your other equipment as well.
Yeah, exactly. You have 2 banks, or rather bank groups, and each bank group consists of 4 banks, and each bank consists of 16 patterns.
And we've got transport control.
Yeah, you have cursor keys to navigate in the interface. You have a song button for entering song mode, and you have a chain button for entering chain mode, which is basically a way of chaining patterns together. And the song mode is made for chaining both chains and patterns together to form more.
And we've got a keyboard.
Yeah, we have a keyboard.
Just
here is our little keyboard.
And it's got aftertouch?
No, I'm sorry, Nick, it hasn't. But it's quite capable, nevertheless. It's used to control the analog synth voice tracks and the CV tracks and the FX track as well, actually. So all tracks can be controlled by the keyboard.
So you can use it for inputting notes in real time and step time?
Yeah, you can use it both for inputting in real time and step time.
So, and we've got the 10 rotary, are they push encoders at the top here?
Yeah, they have both push-click functions, and you turn them to edit the parameters you see here on the screen. The
screen's a little bit smaller, perhaps, than the MonoMachine. And
yeah, it's a little bit smaller, but it's quite visible.
And what about around the back? Let's have a look at the connections.
Yep. The connections here of course is the on-off switch, power in, a USB port which is used for sending or receiving MIDI data. You have MIDI in, out, through, and it's a little special thing about the MIDI out and the MIDI through, because they can also send DIN sync signals, so you can control old analog rhythm machines. For example.
So can you address the MIDI and the USB and the MIDI and the outputs as separate ports?
Yeah, you can do that.
Okay, all right.
You have CV gate outputs here.
Are they stereo? So you've got 2 signals out of each one, is that right?
Exactly.
Okay.
You have a stereo input and you have a stereo output.
So only 2 outputs?
2 outputs, yeah. And a headphone output.
So obviously we want to hear what the building blocks are like. I mean, the raw oscillators are kind of important. So can you give us a taste of what they sound like?
Yeah. Here's a saw waveform. Some pulse with modulation added.
Oh, so you can pulse with all the waveforms, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Big fan of pulse width.
Yeah, it sounds really lovely. And here's some sub-oscillators added to the saw
So
waveform.
2 oscillators, each oscillator has a sub-oscillator.
Yeah.
Right.
Transistor pulse. Also some pulse with modulation here.
That's nice. It's an interesting colour.
It's a little sharper than the next waveform, which is the standard pulse waveform. And here you can hear some examples of the pulse waveform. Sub-oscillators, tuning.
So just to get things straight, this is each of these separate engines is just a single voice analog mono, right?
Yeah, that's correct. You have 4 separate voices.
So they don't, you can't link them up to be chords at this point. They're just you can program them presumably
Yeah, exactly.
But you can't play them from a keyboard as a chord.
No, you can't do that. You can, for example, link voices, so you can play 2 voices in kind of a unison mode, but you can't play chords.
The other thing I was just listening out for, is there like a hypersaw mode? I mean, that seems to be on a lot of things now. You don't have that?
No magic trance.
The magic trance button?
No, nothing like that. But you can, for example, if you route track 1 to track 2, you link those 2 tracks and you use saw waveforms on both tracks, then you have a 4 oscillator voice, which can be quite trancy.
Right, okay. I guess the next thing that's kind of important is the filter. I mean, because obviously you've got 2 filters per voice, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So, I mean, we got to have the sweep on a sawtooth and full resonance and all that. So if you could demonstrate for us, Maestro.
Your wish is our command. So here is the 4-pole ladder filter. Increasing resonance here.
I'm not hearing any stepping. How have you interpolated? Because you've only got 128 values there, right?
Yeah, but it's interpolated, so I mean that's very important, of course. So you don't get this, which is a bit unfortunate when playing live, for example.
And can you control that externally from like an 8-bit controller, or is it just standard MIDI control?
You mean the filter?
The sweep, yeah.
With an external MIDI device? Yeah, you can control almost all as parameters externally using an external MIDI device. And here's the 2-pole multi-mode filter. And it's a multi-mode filter, so you can have different types of filters.
That sounds like it's got a slightly more musical resonance, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit more prominent. Here's a band pass filter chosen for the multi-mode filter. And here's a high-pass filter. And here's the second high-pass filter.
Will it self-oscillate?
Yeah, more or less. You can crank up the resonance.
Okay, so can you play it? Like you can tune the filter and play the filter over?
Oh, okay. You can do that. So you can basically use the filter as an oscillator if so wanted.
Good to know.
Each track you have 2 assignable LFOs, 2 assignable envelopes, and that's for each track. So that's basically times 6. So there's a lot of modulation possibilities in there. So you won't run out of ideas when working with analog 4.
Is the modulation matrix kind of pretty much limitless, or are there limitations there?
I mean, there's always limitations, of course, but it's as limitless as you could hopefully imagine. So if you work with an LFO, for example, you can see here oscillator 2 parameters, oscillator 1 parameters.
Right, so you can get to pretty much most of it. Okay.
Yeah, you can.
So I'm guessing really where the Elektron kind of vibe works is because it's integrated with the sequencer, and it's got a parameter lock and that kind of stuff going on as well, yeah?
Yeah, it has, and that's the beauty of it, so to speak, because with the parameter locks, which is a concept of each note trig can have its own unique parameter settings. So, for example, one note could have a certain kind of filter cutoff, and the next note could have a completely different filter cutoff. And it's, of course, not only limited to filter. You can parameter lock any parameter. So it's
is there a limit to the depth, the number of parameter locks you can have on a single step?
Yeah, there's a limit to the total amount of parameter locks, but not really to the amount of locks per step. So it's a shared pool of available parameter locks, which all tracks share. But it's a very, very big pool. So if you run out of it,
you're demonstrating here that you're just adding random parameter locks on various different steps.
And I'm hearing some effects there as well. So
yeah,
Exactly, you have 3 send effects on the machine. A reverb, a chorus and a delay. So you can send all the 4 tracks to these effects. And the effects can of course also be parameter lock. You have a dedicated effects track for that purpose. So you can, for example, parameter lock the decay time of the reverb or the delay feedback or whatever. So it's very flexible and very open to experimentation.
So all of these effects are send. There's no dedicated effects engine port for each voice, right?
No, it isn't. But I mean, you could look at the overdrive circuit in some regard as an insert effect, so to speak, because it's an overdrive circuit.
That was actually somebody asked via Facebook. Thank you very much for asking, by the way. I've got lots of questions in about this unit, which I'm hoping to cover. They said, does it have the same drive? Because they were very keen about the oscillator or the filter drive. It gave it a really nice smudgy sound. And can you give us a little bit of an example of that?
Yeah, we could show you how the overdrive circuit sounds like.
Yeah, you can hear it's got that kind of smudge to it.
Yeah.
So maybe we could listen to a few sort of sound groups, you know, like basses and leads and synths and percussion, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. Here's a few bass examples. And as you can hear, switching between the patches are instant.
Yeah. How many patches are there?
You can store 128 patches. But you can also store 128 kits. And each kit contains 4 sounds. These are called sounds. But those kits aren't really, those sounds in the kits aren't taking any place here in the sound storage, the patch storage.
They're like a separate buffer?
Yeah, separate buffer, yeah.
And do they store the sequence data as well?
No.
Okay. Well, some nice stuff in there.
Yeah, the reverb especially makes it a very capable machine of, for example, drone ambient stuff, because it's a really nice sounding reverb.
I had one more question about, so who is the film buff in the company that is responsible for the initial promo videos? Because that was
That's me, actually.
That's you?
Yeah.
Okay, congratulations. I got a lot, you must be very pleased, it went down very well.
Yeah, it did. And here you can hear some effects in action as well. The delay.
There are chorus, reverb and delay, is that
Yeah.
the 3 effects? Okay.
And you can get quite extreme with the settings. So this is your favorite psychosis.
Speaking of the polyphony, I'll go back to that. I mean, I know you can't play it polyphonically, but presumably you can set it up so that it will play chords of a type and get sort of approaching what would be pad sounds. I mean, how could you set something like that up for us without too much of it there? Look, easy, he says.
If you have made, for example, a basic sound which is suitable for a pad, you can load it to all the tracks. And then you can just assign different note values to the different trigs of the different tracks.
Okay, and so presumably that takes us on to the next point, which would be if you wanted to then control all of those voices at the same time. Is there a way of doing that? So you're controlling multiple parameters within voice. So if you want to open the filter on all the voices simultaneously, can you do that?
Yes, you can actually. There's a special mode called the performance mode, which basically makes the encoder, it makes it possible for the encoders to control several parameters at one time. So encoder 1, for example, could control the filter of track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, and encoder 2 could control the pitch or maybe
so
the LFO
you
range.
can sort of come out and also like have macro control.
Yeah, it's parameter macros basically.
So, and how many parameters per knob can you?
Up to 5 parameters.
Up to 5, okay.
And I mean, that's very handy when you play live. For example, in an ideal world, you wouldn't ever be having to step out of the performance menu, because then you have, by carefully selecting the parameters, you can, I mean, turn knob A for the intended effect, turn knob B for the intended effect, instead of
so
having
sort
to
of it's almost like you're setting
pages.
up your own controller to control itself.
Yeah.
All right, so it keeps it sort of all in-house. And can these controllers work with external equipment as well? So you can use them to send MIDI CC to other gear? I mean,
you can't set them up to like send dedicated or assignable CC messages, for example, but the knobs do send CC.
Right, so they'd be doing something as well as what they were doing externally. Yeah. Okay, and the other thing is obviously it's got CV integration, right? Yep. So the idea is to integrate it with other external control voltage kit, right?
Exactly. You have 2 outputs, and each output can send 2 signals. So it's a two stereo outputs, and you can use them to interface the analog 4 with old analog gear or more recent modular
So it
rigs.
does Hertz, volt per octave,
yeah,
S-trig, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, S-trig, V-trig, gate.
So built
pulse.
in already. Perhaps we could quickly set up something. I've got the Dope for Dark Energy. If we magically make that appear, then we can have a look and see how that integrates, right?
Yes.
So what we have here is the Dope for Dark Energy plugged up. We've got it coming out of the CVA and B. CVA B is going to gate and control voltage, and the CV-CD, we've got C going to VCF frequency.
Yes.
Got there in the end. So if we could just have a listen. So basically, we're also returning the audio back into the inputs of the analog 4, right?
Yeah, that way you can, for example, add the analog 4 effects to the dark energy signal. You can also use the analog 4 filters to filter the dark energy signal. So
you'd have to assign that to a track, though, presumably, or has it got dedicated input filters?
You have to use one of the tracks. You can the parameter where you select the oscillator, that can also be used to select to be assigned to use an input. For example, input A or input B.
Right. Okay. So and you were actually playing the Dofer from the keyboard on the unit. Ah. And it's the same, we can plug a MIDI keyboard into the analog 4 and it would drive the external signal. Right, okay, so you've got lots of different ways of interfacing them.
Yeah. So basically you can use, for example, the dark energy as an additional oscillator, because you could parameter lock, as you can use parameter locks, you could parameter lock, so on step 1 you use an internal analog 4 oscillator, on step 2 you parameter lock it, so you use one of the external input signals, and that will mean the dark energy.
So each step you could have internal oscillator, external oscillator.
Yeah, exactly. So you can get, it could be a lot of variations going on, depending on how you have set up your little external synth modules and how you have connected it to the analog 4. But it's a very, very flexible master brain in an analog studio.
So I also noticed in the manual there's individual track lengths. Does that mean that you can actually run, say, a pattern of 3 against a pattern of 4 against a pattern of 12 and have them cycle?
Yeah, exactly. So on track 1 you could have a completely different step length compared to track 2 or track 3 or track 4 or track 5 or track 6. So that means you can do like polyrhythms very, very easily and have very, very organic sounding patterns going, not, you know, this stale techno 4 on the floor.
That's interesting. So presumably you can use that with parameter locks and have really long evolving changes as well.
Yeah, you could do that.
Right. So I mean, it seems to me that the sequencer it's more than just, you know, it's not just, like I say, it's not just about the synthesizer. It's very much about the integration with the sequencer and what that can do.
In my opinion, the sequencer is as vital as the sound generation is, because they work together in such a tightly knit way, and that makes the whole concept of the machine, how the sequencer interacts with the sound engine.
So Jenk's got a couple of patterns going against each other there, right?
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. I get lost in that. So, speaking of kind of interfacing, you know, bringing this into your unit, and how it doesn't work with MIDI sequencing. It doesn't MIDI sequence itself.
No, it doesn't. You can't use analog 4 as to control external MIDI equipped gear.
Right. So how would you kind of put it into a system? Say if somebody's thinking, I really want to get one of these, you know, how is it best going to work against my existing equipment so I'm able to live on a laptop? I mean, what would be
you could use the USB port, for example, or you could use the MIDI in port to send a MIDI clock or MIDI notes or whatever to control it from an external source. But you can't use the analog 4 to control like your external MIDI equipped sampler, for example. But it's more focused towards the analog realm. So you can use it to control your modular, you can use it to control your old vintage analog gear, but...
Right, so you bring the whole... Right.
Yeah.
And the other thing is obviously, if you're in a live situation, patch loading, sometimes you get a little bit of a glitch or a pause for it to load a sound. Is that the case with this, or I mean...
No, it's instant. So as soon as you, for example, switch patterns with different kits assigned to them, the sounds are instantly switched. So there's no audible lag at all. And that's very flexible when you play live, for example, because then you would need everything to be smooth.
So can you put like patch changes on steps of different steps of a sequence? So
yes,
it's like just...
actually, and that's a really cool feature, which Jenk is now demonstrating. We have now one track running here, and as you can hear, the sound changes dramatically for each of these steps. And that's different.
But that's just one track. So.
Yeah, that's one track, and different patches loaded to each of the steps here. And
so
this is
it
over one
sort
track.
of emulates more tracks than it's actually got in that, so that's
Yeah.
quite interesting.
And this is just one track, so add 3 more and you get the scope of the possibilities.
And polyrhythms. And
yeah, exactly. And CV sequencing and
right.
FX sequencing as well.
Wow, okay, that's interesting. So what would you say, I mean, what would you say in terms of the kind of what's unique about the analog 4? Because obviously there's competition out there, you know, there are other 4 voices, there are other poly or mono synthesizers or arrays of them. What would you say that is the kind of unique thing about your product, sir?
I would say the control possibilities actually. You have a very capable and well-sounding synth engine, but it hasn't really been any way of controlling in this much detail before, using the sequencer, using the parameter locks, using the performance mode, and also having the capability to send out CV gate signals to incorporate other analog gear into the analog 4 sound chain, sound flow of it. So it's the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, so to speak.
Right. Okay, and this is shipping now, right?
It's shipping now, yeah.
And so what about pricing then?
€10.99 and $11.49.
Okay, so and where do people buy them? Direct from you or retail?
They can buy them directly from us, or they can buy them directly from their favorite retailer as well. It's up for you out there to decide.
And we're going to see you at NAMM as well, presumably?
We will see you at NAMM.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to leave it to Jenk just to kind of carry on doing his thing.